Hello, my name is Sierra Milliman, and for my current events presentation, I decided to talk about the negative effects that the pandemic had on early childhood education. So, the pandemic affected two people in early childhood. It affected the children and the educators the most. So, when it came with the children, they were impacted by they had lower enrollment, they had loss of social time with peers, they had really bad instability, and then they also had the stress of financial hardships from their family. So with their lower enrollment, this means that the students missed many learning opportunities. They missed academic learning opportunities and social learning opportunities and many other developmental opportunities. So with the social interaction, since they did not have that, they did not gain the skills that they needed to be able to go to school within the next couple of years. They did not learn how to correctly interact between their peers. And then also children with special needs were not getting the services that they normally would have when it came to being in school. They were not in school, so they did not get those services. And a lot of the reason that they had such a low enrollment was that parents were afraid of the virus. They had been laid off or were working from home, so they no longer needed childcare because they were home already. And then other parents just did not see the benefit of having their children go to school during the pandemic and having to do remote learning. They instead felt like their child needed to be in the classroom. So the loss of social interaction with the peers was something that really impacted the young children. Social interaction is necessary for everybody, and to be able to have that interaction between peers of your own age is really helpful. It helps with social skills, it helps with problem solving skills, and it helps with building emotional intelligence. And although the pandemic did decrease students interacting with their peers, it actually had a benefit factor where families became closer together, which was really helpful during the pandemic. One question I had for everybody was, how did the loss of social interaction impact you during the pandemic? I know for my family, it was kind of relaxing at the beginning, but then as time went on, we really started missing being able to see our families, going to see grandparents, or just interacting in general with our friends. So the instability and financial hardships, I kind of felt went together. When you have financial hardships, you have instability. And along with the financial hardships and the instability that caused, there was also instability of the children not knowing when they were going to go to school next. You could be remote learning at the drop of a hat, and everything was just changing constantly, and there was so much instability everywhere in every part of your life. Now, the next people that the pandemic impacted in early childhood were the educators. Now, the daycare centers and the home daycares were affected the most, whereas the public and the federally funded programs like Head Start were not so much, but they were still impacted in like the mental health areas. So the educators, they were impacted because they had loss of their income went down, and it was very confusing over what guidelines to follow, and there was negative mental health issues. So first was the confusion. There was several different guidelines on what you should follow, and those guidelines were constantly changing, so you had to make sure that you stayed on top of them, and it was very confusing on what to follow because different places had different guidelines to follow. And then parents would come and go. So you would have lower enrollment, and then new parents would come in and they would go away, or at least where I worked, that's how it was. And that was very confusing for the class because you would constantly have new students all the time. And then also the shutdown policies were very confusing. People were not sure if they had a student who contracted COVID, if they needed to completely shut down, or if they could shut down that room, or if they didn't have to shut down at all, and if a staff member became ill or another child became ill, then they would have to go tested. Those policies were also constantly changing, and so it was very confusing. Was there ever a time that you were confused on what you should do during the pandemic? I felt like everything was changing all the time, and nobody was really sure on what we should follow or what we should do. So next was the income loss. With the fewer students being enrolled, it caused a great income loss for educators. These people lived off of the tuition from these students, and if they're not enrolled, then you don't have the tuition. And then along with that, there became a higher cost of care. Food went up, supplies went up, there was different trainings that you had to do, and then cleaning had to be more in-depth, so of course the extra cleaning supplies also costed extra money. Now, the one most important one I felt like was a impact for educators was their mental health. Mental health was very important, and a lot of educators felt like they were exhausted because they were being overworked and they were confused, and the task load was significantly higher than before. And then there was also the worry of catching COVID and then bringing it home to your family members. And I felt like that was really scary for if somebody would catch it and then bring it home to their grandparents, per se, or their young children. And then a quote that was in the article that I read about early childhood educators was that early childhood educators to report being more anxious, overwhelmed, and stressed, all of which they felt negatively impacted their ability to provide high quality care and education to children. When you are not your best self, you do not teach the best. How you feel inside and with your mental health really impacts on what kind of job you do. So to bring out a sort of depressing subject, I wanted to have a quote from Bill Gates that says the first 5 years have so much to do with how the next 80 turn out. Early childhood is very important, and even though we were so negatively impacted from COVID, it's still very important for young children and for everybody to have. Thank you so much for watching my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.